Hi, my name's Dan, and in this video we're going to go through the full end-to-end process of installing BookStack on Ubuntu 22.04. There's a couple of things that I've done ahead of time that won't be shown within this video. One of those is that I've purchased a domain name, which I'm going to use for my BookStack setup. And I'm going to set this up on wiki.bookstackapp.com, and that's going to be the URL of my BookStack instance I'm going to set up, but I've already purchased bookstackapp.com and got that at the ready. But we'll do a bit of configuration around that to point it to the instance. And then I've also got an account on DigitalOcean here, and this is the platform that I'm going to use to create my BookStack instance. So DigitalOcean is a hosting provider, and we're going to use one of their VPS instances, virtual private server, which they call droplets, and we'll use one of those to create our Ubuntu 22.04 instance and install BookStack onto it. But you can use whatever provider you want. You could use a system internally within your house, an old computer. You might need to do some networking to allow that, but it doesn't really matter. The process should be the same generally if you're using the same operating system. So let's crack on. So here I am in DigitalOcean. I've gone to the create droplet area. And so for my purposes, for the whole video's intent, I'm going to click 22.04. And then coming down here, I've got a choice of different machines to run this on. That one looks a bit pricey. If you click on here, you can get some cheaper ones. Realistically, BookStack will run absolutely fine on this lowest end one. But what I am going to do, I'm going to choose this one because I'm only going to run this temporarily for the purposes of this video. And it'll just be slightly faster because it has two CPUs, meaning it has two threads, so it can do things a little bit quicker. But quite honestly, that $4 a month one is fine. You can always scale up on these platforms. Scaling down is often harder, but if you need to, scaling up is quite easy on a lot of these hosting providers. Right, let's choose a data center region. I'm going to choose London because I'm in the UK, so that'll be the closest one to me, so should be fastest. Authentication method. I'm going to choose my own SSH key, so I can just log in using a pre-configured key that I've already set up. If you don't have a key already set up, you can just use a password, enter it there, and just remember that password because you'll need it to access the machine. But I'm going to use SSH keys, so I don't need to play about with passwords. Down here, enable backups. That's probably a good idea to have backups at a system level automated, just as a good kind of safety net, I suppose, in case anything goes wrong with your instance. Again, this is just a demo instance, so I'm not going to enable that, but doing that kind of thing is recommended. And same with monitoring, really. So you can get free monitoring in this case. Again, I'm not too worried about this instance. And then a host name, I'm going to name this to be the same that I'm going to use as the domain name. So wiki.bookstackapp.com, just so it's more organized. And yeah, that's my project. Then I'll create my droplet. There we go. Go back to droplets. Put me back at a weird place. I'll click through on that, and we can see this is in the process of being created. So what we're going to need, first of all, is an IPv4 address, or just an IP address in general, so that we can point our domain out at. So that's what I'm waiting for now. If I refresh the page, oh no, there we go. It's all been created. So I'm going to copy this IPv4 address, and I'm going to go to Namecheap, which is what I use for my domain purchasing and domain setup. So here I'm in the configuration for my bookstackapp.com domain. I'm going to add a new record in here, and it's going to be an A record because we want to point it to an IP address. And I'm going to set that as wiki because that is the subdomain that I'm going to set up. So it's going to be wiki.bookstackapp.com. And then I'm going to point it at that IP address that I just copied. And that's saved, so hopefully that should be all working once we need to use it. Now I'll go back onto the instance, and I guess let's access this system and start the install process. But yeah, let's make sure we got access first. So again, we'll use that IP address to access the system over SSH. So I'm going to jump into my terminal window, go SSH, and it's going to be root at, whoop. Let's copy the wrong thing. At the IP address. I'll hit enter. Yes, I trust it. Cool. And now I'm fully logged in, which is a good sign. So this is effectively a fresh Ubuntu 22.04 instance. We can see up here it says welcome to Ubuntu 22.04 LTS. Brilliant. So now we just need to go through the process of installing BookStack itself. So if we jump back into the browser and go to the BookStack website, on the home page there's a link to install, or otherwise you can go through to our documentation page and find the install page through there. We click through on this link. Then here there's a Ubuntu 22.04 script. Click that to jump to this section, and now we'll see the relevant commands to execute this script. Now, as it warns here, this is only for a fresh instance only. You could run this on a Ubuntu instance that's you've already done stuff with, but it's not gonna safely regard anything that's already on the system. It could overwrite stuff that's already there. It could potentially delete stuff, or it just could make a mess, really. So again, this is only really designed for a fresh system like we're doing here, as we've done nothing with our instance yet, we've just logged in. So we'll run this command, or we'll copy that, and then we'll paste that into the terminal, and that's going to download the script. We'll run the next one, and this one changes the permission of that script that we've just downloaded to make it executable. And like here, we can just execute it like this by sudo and then running the script directly. And we'll hit enter. Now, as we've done that, it's going to confirm a place where it's going to log out the full output of this script to. So if there's any issues during this process, a lot of the detail is going to be hidden to make it a bit of a nice experience so we can see what's going on. But if anything does go wrong, then that log file can come in really handy, just to know exactly what might have gone wrong during the process. After that, it's then asking us to enter a domain or IP if we're not using a domain. You want to host BookStack on and press enter. And there's some examples there. So we're not putting like the HTTP or any slashes on there. It's just that domain or IP. So in our case, that's wiki.bookstackapp.com, and we'll hit enter. So now it's going to run through this kind of a 9-step process and install BookStack, and it will tell us what it's doing at each stage. Now this first one will likely by far take the longest because it's going to do most of the work of updating the system repositories and installing the required software, which is obviously a lot of download and install time. So really at this point, we just got to wait and wait until it's finished whatever it needs to do. And we'll see the whole process go through step by step. Okay, that didn't take too long, only a few minutes. But now it's gone through all of the steps and it has finished. And when it's finished, it gives you a few details that might be useful. So it's good to note these down, maybe copy these to a text file in your system, because you might need these later. So we've got the default login email and the password, so to access the system. The access URL, so it gives you the IP address detected by what the IP address is of the machine. But typically we set it up on the domain, so we'll go on this one. Hopefully, if the domain's working now after we configured it in our domain system. And it also says the install path, so that's quite important. Whenever you need to do something with the system, maybe updates in the future, you're going to need to go to that path to do a lot of the commands. So definitely take note of that. And also the log. So again, if there's any issues, it's still useful to maybe have a look at that log to see the full output of what's gone on during the install process. But with any luck, we should be able to just go to this domain now and see our BookStack instance. Hey, all right, that's good. So we're on wiki.bookstackapp.com and it's gone to the login page. So let's use those default admin details. So admin@admin.com and a password with a password. And we're logged in. So one of the first things you should probably do is change those details, of course. You don't want a live instance up there with secret information and you're using the standard default credentials. So if you go to here, edit your profile, and then you can change the password here. You might want to change the email address as well to be your own email address. For example, if you need to then go through the forget password process, you might need, you would probably want that to go to your actual email address. So yeah, set up the admin account properly. as your first step, just as a good security practice. But it looks like our instance is working, so let's just make sure we can create things. So let's create like my first book. Seems to work, and let's do a page. So my first page. This is my first page. Yay. And one thing that I'm going to do is just upload an image as well, because I want to make sure that process works. Go to my stock images. Get some lovely kitty cat photos. Here we go. Cool. So that looks like it's worked perfectly. Save that. I can create pages. I can add in cat images. What else would I want to do? Perfect. But one thing that you might notice is that up here we've got this little padlock icon. Connection is not secure. And that's because we're on standard old HTTP. It doesn't even show us in the URL bar these days, but we're not using HTTPS, so it's saying our connection is not secure because technically any data going from our local computer to our BookStack instance is not encrypted, so it could be spied on. So it's quite common practice on websites these days to set up HTTPS. Now the BookStack install script doesn't do this as part of its install because it often has some requirements, like you need to have this on a domain really, and different people like to use HTTPS or use different providers for HTTPS in different ways, but we can quite easily add it on ourselves. So let's go through that process. So to do that, we're going to use an application called Certbot, which provides us with certificates via Let's Encrypt, which is a whole system that allows us to install HTTPS certificates for free. And it's quite easy to go through the process. So we can say my HTTP website is running, and now we have to select what web server that we're using. So by default on the 22.04 install script, it will use Apache. So we'll select Apache here. And then we have to select the system. And it looks like this is a little out of date. But if we choose the closest thing to Ubuntu 22, which is Ubuntu 20, we'll go for this one and we'll hope that the process works much the same. Right, so step 1, SSH into the server, we've already done that. Install a snapd. So we'll go to the instructions of that, but I think this is already done by default on Ubuntu these days. So I'm going to actually go back and skip that step. But if you have any issues with step number 3, which we'll see if we have any issues, we might have to go back to step number 2. We'll copy this command to make sure our snapd system is up to date. It looks like it's doing something as an error, so that's a pretty good sign that we didn't need to do the previous step. Cool, that looks like it did something. We'll go back, remove any Certbot Auto and any Certbot OS packages. So we haven't attempted to install Certbot HTTPS via any other method yet, so we shouldn't have anything to remove. So again, I think we can safely skip that step. And then install Certbot. We'll jump back to our terminal to do this one. There we go. Looked like it worked. Now step 6, prepare the certbot command. This just makes it so we can run it as certbot in the terminal. All right. And then choose how you'd like to run Certbot. So you can just get the certificate and configure it yourself. But what we do, if we run this one, it's just going to do most things for us, which will be nice and easy. So we'll paste that in. So now it's going to ask us to enter an email address. And I think this is quite important because previously, especially in the early days of using Certbot and Let's Encrypt, I have got a security notice saying, oh, there's been a security thing that's been found, and we're going to have to invalidate your certificate tomorrow. So make sure it's been renewed in the last couple of weeks. So there can be important notices that go to this. I mean, if you don't care about your site too much, then maybe it doesn't matter too much. But you can, if it's a production site, then it's usually a good idea to use a valid email address. So I'm going to go dan@bookstackapp.com. Please don't use my email address. use your own email address. Terms of service, you can read those if you like. I've read them all before, so I'm gonna hit yes. And do you want to share with EFF? I've already done that past, to be honest, so I'm gonna say no here. And it's like, what names would we like to activate HTTPS for? So it's gone through our config for our web server and found that we've already got something set up for wiki.bookstackapp.com. If you had multiple websites set up, it will give you a whole bunch of options. But we've just got the one here, so I'm going to type in 1 to show we want option 1 and hit enter. It's going to go through the process, and this works by checking that web URL. So it's going to check wiki.bookstackapp.com and make sure it can reach that as part of the script to know that you're an owner of the website. And then it's only then, once they validated you're an owner effectively, that they'll generate a HTTPS certificate for you. So it does have to be a domain that you own and is active. You can't run this process for a domain that you don't own on the World Wide Web. I could technically set up my own version of google.com locally by writing my own sort of custom DNS system, but I could never kind of get a certificate for google.com using this system. So it has to be a proper domain on the World Wide Web. But yeah, that looks like it's worked successfully. Retrieve certificate, save that. It's also added a rewrite. Sometimes that doesn't work for me with the Apache script, but you know, that's not a bad thing. If it does work, then automatically moving all the HTTP to HTTP, all the HTTP activity to HTTPS, so it's all secure, is generally a good idea. So yeah, that looks like it's worked. So if we'll go back to our BookStack instance now, we've got my first page. I'm going to do a refresh. So yeah, it didn't redirect us. We're still on HTTP, but if I put HTTPS, and it's kind of worked. Now it looks broken. It absolutely does, because this is, of course, does not look right. We've got these massive icons. I mean, what is going on there? But it hasn't shown a big scary security error page, which means the HTTPS is probably working. And in fact, it says parts of this page are not secure, such as images, but it's still connected over HTTPS, which means the HTTPS system is working itself, but parts of it are not, which means it's kind of mixed content. Now, what we've done, we've made the web server compatible with HTTPS, or upgraded it to use HTTPS where possible, but we haven't told BookStack about HTTPS. So we need to go back to our terminal, and now we need to navigate to our BookStack instance. So cd to that path that was output during the install process, var www bookstack app, which is where all of our BookStack files live. So if I do ls, then we'll see all the loads of files in here that are related to BookStack's installation. There's a lot of thing when configuring BookStack that you'll need to edit details within your .env file, which is where much of the system level configuration exists. And that's by default in our Linux system a hidden file, but it does exist there. So if we do ls-a to show all files, you'll see a bunch more in the output here, including this .env file, which is where all of our settings live for our BookStack instance. So now I'm going to edit my .env file, so I can do that via nano, a command line text editor, .env. And then we'll go down here, and then one of the things that we see here is our app URL, and that is set to HTTP. So that's why things are failing, is because BookStack itself is using HTTP, wiki.bookstackapp.com, but we're trying to access it on HTTPS. So we can update this by adding an S in there. And that's all we really need to do at this stage. So we'll save this file by pressing Ctrl O and then hitting enter to say we want to write it to .env. Then Ctrl X to exit. Now we'll quit out of there. So let's go back to our browser and we'll refresh. Hey, that's looking a lot better. We've now got the whole interface up. It's still HTTPS in the URL here, and it's no longer completely broken. So that's a big step forward. But one minor thing here, I've kind of done on purpose, is that if you come up here, you'll see parts of this page are not secure, such as images. And that's due to this image here. Because we've uploaded that during our BookStack instance being not on HTTPS, that kind of reference to this image is now within the BookStack storage system as HTTP, not HTTPS. So you end up getting these warnings. And that can relate to a lot of things, especially if, this doesn't really matter if you just set up a completely fresh instance. But especially if you've been using an instance for a very long time, you might have a lot of these kind of images there, a lot of references that are HTTP, but you want them to be HTTPS. Now you've changed the URL. So we need to change that and fix this, ideally, so we can get this completely secure, so we haven't got this kind of mixed content warning. And that is absolutely doable because BookStack provides a helper. So if we go back to the BookStack documentation page, and on the left-hand side here, under maintenance, we've got a command section. And then there's a whole bunch of possible commands that you can use to help administer and run some common tasks for your BookStack instance. But the one that we need is this update system URL. And this simply looks across all your BookStack storage and will replace one URL with another. So we'll use this. And I'm going to copy the start of that. Because what you do, you run php artisan bookstack :update URL. You pass it in the old URL first, and then the new URL second, and it effectively does a find and replace with a new over the old. And to run these, you need to be within this directory where your BookStack installation is. If you don't run it from there, it's not going to work. You'll get an error or saying artisan doesn't exist or something along those lines. But so yeah, make sure you're within your BookStack directory where your .env file is if you ever need to edit that. So I'm going to paste in what I copied, which is the php artisan bookstack update URL. As I said earlier, you need to pass in the old URL first. So http and then wiki.bookstackapp.com. So that was the old one, and then we want to pass in the new HTTPS version. HTTPS wiki.bookstackapp.com. Hit enter. Now it's going to say it's going to do that. Do you want to proceed? Yes. And now it's going to do a double confirmation, just because this can be quite a dangerous thing, especially if you mistyped one of these. You might change things to an invalid URL. So it's saying, have you made a backup of your existing database? In this instance, because we're installing it from fresh, I'm not really bothered about our old system, but that would probably be a good idea, is to make a backup if you're doing this much later on down the road. But I'm just going to say, yeah, I've made a backup. All right. So that ran pretty fast. We haven't got a whole much in our BookStack instance, but we can say it updated one row in our pages and the HTML content of those and our images. And that makes sense because we've got one page and we've got one image where that where this might apply. So if we go back to our BookStack instance, hopefully now if we refresh, hey, we've no longer got any warning. We can just see it's a nice good old padlock and says verified by Let's Encrypt, system that provide us our certificate. And there we have it. That's the full process of setting up a BookStack instance on Ubuntu 22.04 with HTTPS support. So there's a few things that we haven't gone through in this tutorial. So this completely omits any kind of server hardening or server security advice. That's kind of out of the scope of this and out of the scope of the BookStack install script. So depending on your environment, you might want to look up some guides on how to make your system more secure. And the common term for that is hardening. So if you search maybe Google for Ubuntu 22.04 server hardening guide, and that can provide some good information there. In terms of BookStack security, as I said, you'd want to change the admin access details. But what I'd recommend is in our setup documentation here, there's a security section, and just run through that and make sure you kind of understand a lot of the options available and the different practices involved, because you might want to secure images in a more secure way if they're really important and no one ever sees the images in your instance, for example. But you can just go through these steps here and go through this documentation and you'll get a pretty good idea. But yeah, that is everything that I've got to show in this video. If you have any issues, just feel free to give us a shout on our Discord forum. So our Discord server is quite active. I'll put a link to that within the description below. The same with the documentation pages here. So the install page, I'll put a link to that in the description below, and also the Certbot instructions as well. But yeah, that's absolutely everything. So good luck with setting up your own server, and have a wonderful day.